You're watching World News Program, coming to you live from Algiers. I'm Remzian, and these are the top stories. Several martyrs and wounded in new Zionist raids on different areas in Lebanon. Hezbollah says it is waging fierce battles against the occupation forces amid widespread international condemnation of the Zionist attacks and calls to include Lebanon in the ceasefire agreement between Tehran and Washington. On the second day of the truce, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard warned that the region would turn into hell if hostilities escalated. Trump confirmed that U.S. forces would remain around Iran until it adheres to the agreement, and Tehran reiterates its refusal to restrict its uranium enrichment program. In the developments regarding the Strait of Hormuz crisis, Iran has identified alternative shipping routes in the strait to avoid sea mines. The European Union has confirmed its refusal to impose transit fees, and reports indicate that hundreds of ships are stranded in the waterway. Hello there and welcome back. Lebanon Civil Defense reported that Zionist army's airstrikes in southern Lebanon killed at least 17 people and injured dozens on Thursday. The strikes targeted towns including Escalation and Abbasiyah near Tyre, where earlier in the day 7 civilians were killed and others wounded. Residents south of the Litani River have called for international assistance to evacuate amid the ongoing attacks. And Lebanon declared Thursday a national day of mourning following Zionist airstrikes that killed more than 200 civilians and injured over 1,000 others. Local media reported that Prime Minister Nawaf Salam announced the mourning period for the victims of the strikes, along with the closure of public administrations, institutions, and municipalities, the lowering of flags to half-masts, and adjustments to regular programming on radio and television stations. The Israeli occupation army issued a new warning on Thursday, urging residents of Beirut's southern suburbs to evacuate, threatening further strikes it claims are targeting Hezbollah. A military spokesperson posted a map on X with an urgent warning for residents of 8 neighborhoods, vowing to continue attacking the group's military infrastructure across the southern suburbs. Hezbollah announced on Thursday that its fighters were engaged in very close clashes with Zionist forces in the border city of Bin Jbeil, while also launching wide-ranging strikes on areas deep inside the occupied territories. In a statement, the group said its fighters were confronting a Zionist merchandise or mechanized force attempting to advance toward the city's market, using light and medium weapons as well as rocket-propelled grenades. It added that Israeli vehicles and soldiers were also targeted elsewhere in the city with rocket barrages and artillery fire. Hezbollah also announced that it targeted a Zionist military warship off the Lebanese coast with a naval cruise missile, and its military media released a video it said shows footage of the strike. Pakistan's Prime Minister's office said that Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam requested Islamabad's support during a phone call for an immediate halt to Israeli attacks targeting Lebanon and its people. The office added that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif told Salam that Pakistan is engaged in sincere efforts to promote peace in the region, and in that spirit will hold peace talks between Iran and the United States. And Lebanon announced its intention to file an urgent complaint against Israel with the UN Security Council over what it described as aggressive attacks on its country. On Thursday, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said Lebanon had decided to lodge a complaint, adding that the strikes targeted densely populated residential neighborhoods, disregarding regional and international efforts to halt the war in the region. And Russia stressed on Thursday that the US-Iran ceasefire in the Middle East should also include Lebanon. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov welcomed the deal in a call with his Iranian counterpart, while Moscow said the agreement has regional implications, especially for Lebanon. Russia also condemned Israeli strikes, warning they could undermine ongoing negotiations. And China stressed on Thursday that Lebanon's sovereignty and security must not be violated following Israeli strike that undermined the US-Iran ceasefire in the Middle East. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said civilian safety must be ensured, urging restraint and de-escalation.
Lebanon's sovereignty and security must not be violated, and the lives and property of civilians must be protected. China calls on all parties concerned to exercise calm and restraint and to work towards de-escalating the situation in the region.
British Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper announced that Britain strongly desires that the Middle East ceasefire include Lebanon. In remarks to Sky News on Thursday, Cooper confirmed her country's desire to extend the ceasefire to Lebanon, expressing her deep concern over the escalating Israeli attacks witnessed in Lebanon yesterday.
Well, we want to see an end to hostilities in Lebanon. I think what Israel was doing yesterday with this escalation of strikes was completely wrong. We've seen the mass displacement of civilians in Lebanon, so with significant humanitarian consequences. We've seen, obviously, the escalation and the increased deaths yesterday. So I think this escalation is damaging. It's wrong. It's going in the wrong direction. We want the ceasefire extended to cover Lebanon. And frankly, I think this is about security of Israel as well as the security of Lebanon and the security of the whole of the Middle East. And that's why this is so important.
And the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, called for expanding the Iran-related truce to include Lebanon, given the ongoing escalation in the region. In statements made on Thursday, Kallas criticized the actions taken by the Israeli occupation in Lebanon, stressing that they do not fall under the category of self-defense and emphasizing that this concept does not justify the scale of the destruction inflicted to the country. And Spain's Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez accused Israel of violating international law and the ceasefire agreement following airstrikes on Lebanon on Wednesday. He also announced that Spain plans to reopen its embassy in Tehran, which was closed in March due to the war, after the US-Iran truce, adding that the ambassador has been instructed to resume duties and restart diplomatic operations. And Algeria condemned in the strongest terms the brutal and barbaric Zionist raids that have targeted and continue to target various parts of Lebanon, expressing its full solidarity with the country, its leadership and people during these difficult times, according to a statement issued by the Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The statement added that Algeria called for concerted efforts by the international community to put an end to this blatant aggression which targets the sovereignty, security, and stability of Lebanon and threatens to plunge the entire region back into a cycle of escalation despite the preliminary agreement reached by the parties, at least issue on a cessation of hostilities. The spokesman for Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya construction headquarters, Ibrahim Zulfikari, threatened in statements on Iranian television to turn the region into hell if hostilities against his country escalate. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry said Tehran was close to responding overnight, but held back to allow further diplomacy, adding that any regional peace must include Lebanon, and that Iran will not attend talks in Islamabad unless Israeli attacks on Lebanon stop. U.S. President Donald Trump said all U.S. ships, aircraft, and troops will remain stationed around Iran until Tehran fully complies with the agreement. In a post on Truth Social, he added that U.S. forces and weapons will stay deployed in the region to ensure continued pressure on what he described as a weakened adversary until a real deal is fully implemented. Iran's ambassador to Pakistan said an Iranian delegation would arrive in Islamabad on Thursday evening for talks aimed at resolving the conflict with the United States and Israel, according to a post on X citing Iran's proposed 10-point plan. The ambassador later deleted the post, with an Iranian embassy official telling AFP the announcement had been premature. The head of Iran's atomic energy organization, Mohammad Salami, rejected any restrictions on Iran's uranium enrichment program despite U.S. and Israeli demands. In comments to ISNA news agency, Salami said such conditions were wishful thinking and that will be buried, stressing that uranium enrichment is an essential part of Iran's program. The Algerian Minister of State in charge of Foreign and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, received a phone call from South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ronald Lamola. A statement from the Algerian Foreign Ministry indicated that the two ministers exchanged views on developments in the Gulf region and the Middle East, expressing their hope that the anticipated negotiations between the parties at issue would address the root causes of the conflict, paving the way for a final settlement that guarantees lasting and sustainable stability. Iran's leader Mojtaba Khamenei said his country will move toward a new phase in managing the Strait of Hormuz, stressing that Iran does not seek war but will not give up its rights. In a statement marking the 40th day after the death of his father, Mojtaba Khamenei, he added that Tehran will continue developing its control over the strategic waterway and will demand compensation for harm caused to its people and veterans. Iran's Ports and Maritime Organization announced safe transit routes through the Strait of Hormuz are designated. The agency also said ships must coordinate with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to use the designated routes. And the European Union rejected the idea of imposing transit fees in the Strait of Hormuz, calling for the continued freedom of navigation through the vital waterway. An EU spokesperson said in a press statement on Thursday that international law guarantees freedom of navigation, meaning no payments of fees of any kind should be imposed. CNN reported citing maritime data that hundreds of ships remain stuck in the Strait of Hormuz despite a 2-week US-Iran ceasefire. According to Marine Traffic, 426 oil tankers, 34 liquefied petroleum gas carriers, and 19 liquefied natural gas vessels are still in the area. The Wall Street Journal also reported that Iranian authorities allowed only 4 ships to pass through the strait on Wednesday, the lowest number recorded this month. And global markets reacted swiftly to the announced 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Oil prices fell while gold and stock prices rose and the dollar weakened in Asian trading. Hopes increased for a recovery in energy supplies, particularly those linked to the Strait of Hormuz. Osama Ayad has more details.
Early signs of economic recovery are emerging in global markets following the recent ceasefire, with decline in oil prices, improving stock market performance, and easing pressure on supply chains. Maritime insurance costs have also dropped, signaling cautious optimism in global trade conditions. However, analysts warn that significant risks remain. Energy prices are expected to stay relatively high, and supply chain disruptions may persist even after the ceasefire is fully implemented. The agreement itself is temporary and conditional, raising doubts about the long-term stability.
And if it were to reopen and remain open, I think it will still take a period of months to get back to where supply needs to be, given the disruption to the refining capacity in the Middle East, which is a critical part of the global supply of refined product, and not just jet fuel, for other products as well. So it will probably take months.
Although the Strait of Hormuz is set to reopen, shipping activity remains limited due to ongoing geopolitical tensions. Investor confidence reflects this uncertainty, with market gains driven more by expectations than concrete progress. Meanwhile, logistical challenges continue to weigh on the energy sector. Roughly 130 million barrels of crude oil, 46 million barrels of refined fuel, and 1.3 million tons of liquefied natural gas remain stranded on nearly 200 tankers awaiting safe passage.
But you've already seen, with the announcement, there was a very significant reduction in the crude price. I think it went down, the last time I looked, it was about 15% lower as a result of just the announcement that was made. So it has some early effect, but getting back to where we would need to be will take a period of months. I don't think it's going to happen in weeks.
Overall, while early indicators point to stabilization, the global economy remains vulnerable to ongoing geopolitical risks and disruptions on critical energy supply routes.
The White House said that U.S. President Donald Trump believes NATO was tested and failed during the Iran war. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt made the remarks on Wednesday, quoting Trump ahead of his meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the White House.
I have a direct quote from the President of the United States on NATO, and I will share it with all of you. They were tested and they failed. And I would add, it's quite sad that NATO turned their backs on the American people over the course of the last 6 weeks, when it's the American people who have been funding their defense. As you know, President Trump will be meeting with Secretary Rutte in a couple of hours here at the White House, and I know he looks forward to having a very frank and candid conversation with him.
The Islamic Waqf Department in occupied Al-Quds announced on Thursday that Al-Aqsa Mosque will be reopened to worshippers without restrictions starting from the dawn prayer. Earlier, the Waqf Department said all gates of the mosque would be open to worshippers from Thursday Fajr prayer. The decision comes after a 40-day forced closure imposed by Israeli forces under the pretext of a state emergency.
After 40 days of closure, Al-Aqsa Mosque was longing for its worshippers, since it was left with no worshippers for 40 days, and they were prevented from access and worship. But thank God for this mercy in letting us return to hold prayers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. Our message is to set out for Al-Aqsa Mosque at all times so that it remains full of worshippers and prayers. May God bless all those who set out for prayers, and may God bless them all.
And Algeria has been elected in the steering committee of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission and the United Nations Statistics Commission. According to an announcement by the United Nations on Thursday, the UN Economic and Social Council, during its session held Wednesday in New York, elected Algeria to serve in the steering committee of the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission for the 2027-2029 term. Algeria was also elected to the United Nations Statistics Commission for the 2027-2023 term. Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune received FIFA President Gianni Infantino and his accompanying delegation. A statement from the Algerian presidency indicated that the meeting was also attended by the Director of the Presidential Cabinet, Boualem, the Minister of Sports, Walid Sadi, and the advisor to the President in charge of the Directorate General of Communication, Kamal Sidi Said. And following the meeting, which took place at the Al Mouradia Palace in Algiers, Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune received symbolic gifts from FIFA President Gianni Infantino, according to a statement from the Algerian presidency. On Thursday, Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune carried out a cabinet reshuffle, appointing Mohamed Arqab as Minister of State, Minister of Hydrocarbons, Mourad Hanifi as Minister of Mines and Mining Industries, and Karima Tafer as Secretary of State to the Minister of Mines and Mining Industries, according to a statement from the Algerian presidency. This is the end of our newscast. Thank you for your kind attention. See you in a bit in our special program.